Hello friends. Have you ever opened a door quickly to not have it squeak, but then when you try to sneak out at night, and you have to open that door slowly in an effort to be sneaky, why does that door squeak? Well, in today's episode, I'm going to talk to you about that. So the reason our door squeaks is because we've got metal-on-metal contact and poor lubrication. The reason it squeaks when we move the door slowly, but not when we move the door quickly, comes to a graph called the Strybeck diagram. So the Strybeck diagram defines our three fundamental regimes for lubrication: boundary, mixed film, and then fully hydrodynamic. When we move the door slowly, we're in boundary lubrication, and we have metal-on-metal contact between the pin and the bushing. When we move the door quickly, we fall into a regime called hydrodynamic lubrication. On the x-axis here, which is what we're going to focus on, we find our place on the x-axis because of speed, the viscosity of our lubricant, divided by our load. So in our door, the load on the pin stays the same. The viscosity of the oil in that pin is also not changing. It's probably changed over time from when the house was built 10, 15, 30, 40 years ago. The viscosity has broken down or evaporated, gone to almost zero. But the speed at which we're moving that door changes. So what we see is if speed goes down, we move to the left side of this chart and we move into boundary lubrication. As the speed of the door goes up, we move into our hydrodynamic lubrication. So what we can also take away from this is the viscosity that we use to lubricate that door is going to matter. So on a lower viscosity oil or lubricant, we're going to kind of always have to move that door faster to stay in hydrodynamic lubrication to keep it from squeaking, versus if we use a oil or a lubricant with a higher viscosity, then we're always going to be able to move the door slower and still maintain that hydrodynamic lubrication. Here we're at a door where I've gone ahead a couple days ago and I cleaned and lubricated both of the pins. And so here we can see no squeaking when I move the door slowly, and also no squeaking when we move it quickly. So now let's talk about the product or products that I would use to lubricate the door pins and why. All right, I think we have all seen this fun engineering flowchart before of does it move? Yes, no. So as we go into the lubricants that I would use to lubricate the door hinge, I thought it might also be fun to talk about the products that I would not use. And here we see WD-40 as the universal lubricant. And I grew up with that understanding of WD-40 as well. It's the one-size-fits-all solution for things that don't move. So here in front of us, we've got the products on the right that I would not use and some products on the left that I would use. And we'll start with the ones that I would not use and the why. WD-40, despite being comically known as the universal lubricant, is really a poor lubricant. It is a significantly better solvent than it is lubricant. Its formulation includes a lot of short-chain hydrocarbons, which actually evaporate very quickly and also help break things down, which is the solvent part of it. It really doesn't have the longer chain hydrocarbons that you see in oils that really provide that good lubrication and that good boundary separation. So if you use WD-40 in your door, it might make things better, but that's because of the solvent flushing out some of the rust and grime and dirt particles that have built up over time. And given the joint shape, you might even get some of those short chain hydrocarbons to stay in there and provide a little bit of something for a little bit of time. But eventually the WD-40 will evaporate and you'll be left with nothing. Silicone lubricants are also very common and prolific in the household lubricants. They've also started filling this one-size-fits-all, this one solution for everything type of regime. What's important to understand with the silicone lubricants is they were one of the original fully synthetic lubricants that came out of the space age, so 50s, 60s, 70s. I forget when exactly they started coming about. And they came about because of their high temperature capabilities. And with aircraft and spacecraft flying higher than we ever had before, higher altitudes, lower pressures, and experiencing higher temperatures, they really did need those silicone lubricants to do some of those jobs. But for them to do those jobs, their additive packages for anti-wear and load carrying capabilities were also boosted. It wasn't just a plain silicone. And even here, we see that it's fortified with Teflon. So silicone lubricants don't do a very good job of really separating bodies, carrying load, and reducing wear. So for me, I tend to stay away from the silicones because I don't believe this $5 or $7 can has really been formulated with the additive packs that it needs to really be a high performer. So I tend to stay away from it. I keep it at the house for stuff like this, but I really don't use it very often. I have found better products to use where this might be used. So for the products that I would recommend, or the types of chemistries that I would recommend, so those are here on the right. So this one, on the left. So this one on the far left is actually an engine assembly lube, anti-seize and engine assembly lube. So why I gravitated to this, and this is actually what I used on my hinges, was the anti-seize property, as well as the moly and graphite, so molybdenum disulfide and graphite. So with anti-seize, we've got in our door hinge, we've got a pin and a socket, and they're rotating on one another. And so anti-seizes help create an easy shear layer between moving bodies so that they don't seize, or so that you don't have corrosion or rust that would bridge between two bodies. And then the molybdenum disulfide and the graphite also act as solid lubricants to provide an additional, low shear condition for the parts to move on one another. I also have some suspicions about some other anti-wear additives that may be in this because of the engine assembly label on it. But those are just suspicions. But anywho, this is what I did actually use to lubricate my door hinges. The next one is this PB Blaster grease, but it actually has less to do with the brand and more about the chemistry. So here on the back of the label, we see that it's a calcium sulfonate complex. And that's actually the reason that I think it's more of the chemistry of the grease and less so the product of the grease. So grease, if you're not familiar, it is a matrix or a thickener with oil. So that is the definition of grease. And with the calcium sulfonate, the matrix, it's easiest to think about that as the sponge of the grease, actually acts as a solid lubricant as well. So with this calcium sulfonate chemistry, we kind of have a double whammy of the sponge is acting as a solid lube, and we have the oil within the grease, which is also acting as a lubricant. So we got a 1-2 punch with this chemistry. And so again, that solid lubricant in that joint will help carry that load of the door pin. The next one, which is a little odd, is actually chain wax. So this is what I've used on my motorcycles for years. And why I think this is actually a good application is with a chain, it's much like a hinge. You've got your 2 pieces of metal or 4 pieces of metal, right? The left and right hand side of the chain. And you have a pin that goes through and connects those linkages all to one another. And that's very similar to a door hinge. And so a unique property that these chain waxes and chain lubricants need to have is they need to be very thin to be able to have a capillary action to get into those tight nooks and those tight crannies. To get that, they also then have to have a very strong additive package to provide that lubrication once the carrier that gets us that capillary action has evaporated and gone away. So the additive pack in these chain lubes has to be very robust and very resilient and be able to be carried by that very thin, light carrier. I've actually used this on my garage to lubricate the hinges and the movement points on that. And so the carrier, I was able to just spray it on the hinges and you could watch it just suck up between the metal parts. It also leaves, I think the word's like tenacious. It really adheres to the surface once the carrier has evaporated away. So it's able to really get into those crannies, and you may even be able to use this on a hinge without taking it apart to clean it. I'm going to try that on a couple hinges throughout the house, but that could be a benefit of this one. The last one that I didn't bring out actually, because it's in my grease gun and it would have made a mess, is the Valvoline, I think it's the extreme pressure or extreme duty Their Red high temperature grease. The reason I would use that one is because the base oil viscosity in that grease is quite high. I believe the base oil in this blaster grease has a viscosity of 120 or 150 centistokes. So it's normal for a oil in a grease. The Valvoline that I don't have here, its base oil has a viscosity of 220 centistokes. So with that higher viscosity base oil in that Valvoline grease, again, we're going to be able to hedge our bets that this value, this viscosity value, is going to stay high even with a low door speed, and that we would be able to stay in this hydrodynamic lubrication state and keep a squeak-free door. So that's more than you guys probably wanted to know, but hopefully you guys learned something. If you did, feel free to hit that like and subscribe button so that you can hear about our next video when that comes out. Bye.